So a couple ground rules. I know I'm supposed to leave time for question. I can't promise that because, I like to talk. If you have a question, if you disagree or something doesn't make sense, feel free to ask. That's the only way I can answer your question. You can tweet at me. I think my Twitter handle is on there at some point, right there, at @CTrappe. So please ask any questions you might have. The biggest thing to remember is that things are always changing. And we just had that discussion the other day with the team, and somebody says, I can't even keep up. I can never catch up. And that's not a thing anymore. You have to stop trying to catch up. So remember this thing? It was like super cool when I had it. I was going to school, wore that. It was so cool. Then there was a CD player later on for, just to keep writing on the print thing for a minute. I used to read 5 printed newspapers a day, right? And now we have this, virtual reality. This is my 4-year-old, Ellie Trappe. This company sent this to me. I unpacked it. She said, let me try. This kid has never, ever seen a virtual reality headset. Knew what to do with it. I mean, seriously, right? Like, it's so intuitive to do new things. But virtual reality is one of the next things. We'll talk about how we use that today and how we use it to maximize our content. Here's just a couple examples. The NFL is actually really, really close to doing virtual reality games. I'm so surprised they're not doing it yet. This is the overhead camera. I mean, I would watch a game just having that on and just being on that camera. Can you imagine advertisers, right? You can't actually do anything else. You can't look at your wife. You can't look at your kids. I need more virtual reality headsets and more programming, seriously. This is Sarah Dietschy. She's a YouTuber. Some people might call her a YouTube star. When she first started, I found her highly annoying. I think it's her full-time job. So the reason I'm showing this to you is because what she did is she did a video jumping out of a plane in virtual reality. And I bet if you go on YouTube today and you Google virtual reality, if you Google jumping out of a plane, there's all kinds of videos doing that and what to wear and how to prepare and whatever. But she was one of the first who actually did it in virtual reality. So the reason I'm sharing that with you is because there is value in being first and trying new things and trying them today. When I grew up in the marketing world, you know what we used to do? We would have a committee meeting. Sound familiar? Then a subcommittee meeting. Then a subcommittee meeting. And then we have to go all the way back up to the bosses to get things approved. And by the time we're done, we're a year in, and whatever we're trying to do, doesn't work anymore. So back then, we thought that worked. Today, it doesn't work. You have to try new things. You have to share stories differently. You have to see what works. And if it doesn't work, you have to try something else. And sometimes you have to circle back. So I'll give you an example. Instagram TV. Anybody familiar with Instagram TV? We tried it for 3 months. I said, what a waste of time. Try something different. And then we went to a conference. We had somebody go on Instagram TV with us, and it kind of blew up. And now we're doing it again. So just because it didn't work the first time may come back later. This is just to give you an example. Virtual reality camera that we use. It's under $100. I bought this. I brought it up to my CEO, and he looked at me and said, why are we now discussing $90 equipment purchases? So I'm just sharing with you how simple and how easy this technology is to use. On the flip side, the problem for publishers is that anybody can buy this, right? Anybody can now build an audience, and anybody can do it if they want to put their time and effort behind it. Back when I grew up in journalism, we were the only ones that owned a printing press, right? Nobody else could even tell the story. I mean, you wanted to get something out there, you had to go through us. So let's talk about Stamats. We have 3 brands. My favorite story to this day is Buildings. Buildings was acquired during World War II because Stamats was a marketing firm, still is a marketing firm today, and they didn't have enough paper. There was a paper shortage or a ration or whatever, and they said, who has paper? A magazine? Let's buy a magazine. Fantastic, actually very innovative, right? Maybe not necessarily journalistically driven, but certainly innovative. So we've been out in print for quite a while. Then we started having websites. Everybody has websites today. Websites should work on all devices. I know somebody was talking about that earlier. Highly responsive websites. Our traffic, I think, is currently up to 30% on mobile devices for our all three sites. We have social media, of course. We can talk about social media for quite a while. I build a brand on social media. And today, if you were to push me, I would argue that most social media is kind of a waste of time, quite frankly, unless you want to put a budget behind it. So unless you're paying Facebook, so when people talk about 80 cents out of the dollar go to Facebook and you have to spend money with Facebook, you are part of that 80 cents, right? So just something to think about. The organic era in social media is widely gone unless you are first and you try new things. So the website is really, really important to have everything you do goes on the website. Every once in a while I have a brand. They say, we're so visual. Everybody's on Instagram. And they only put things on Instagram and they don't put it on the website. But that doesn't really help us long term because it's super hard to actually monetize social media. So how do you maximize teams? Does anybody have any team that's at the perfect number? I mean, do you have enough team members, or do they have enough time? You can give them other things to do. They're never busy. Anybody? Show of hands. Are you paying attention, or are you just nobody has any? You have one.
Everyone in my company feels they're underworked and overpaid.
Underworked, yes, fantastic. Yeah, awesome. Let's talk right after. So I've never, ever worked with a team, obviously, that says, oh, we don't have enough stuff to do. We are busy. What we say at Stamats, when people say, I'm so busy, when our director of content actually says, that's really good. And they say, what? Like, yeah, you're at work. You're supposed to be busy. So you actually have to, there's ways to figure out how to maximize your time. And you only have so much time. So I'll share some of those tricks and tips with you on how to do that. But first of all, this is highly oversimplified. I'm a journalist. I put things in three-word sentences. First of all, we have to have a business goal. So I grew up in journalism. We didn't have business goals as journalists. We just wrote stories. And you know who the only person was I had to please with my story? Anybody know? It's only one person. My boss. If my boss thought I did a good job, I did a good job. And they had no numbers to back it up. It was all gut feeling. I mean, seriously, right? As long as nobody called, I was golden. As long as I halfway spoke decent English, good to go. I grew up in Germany, excuse every once in a while, but not too often. Then I moved into content marketing. You know how content marketers write? They have to have goals. But they're very journalistically driven. So a really good content marketing piece is actually a very good journalistic story because the people who read it, they can't even tell that they're being sold to. We just had that discussion. There's a marketing artificial intelligence conference, and they are writing stories about AI and marketing. And when you read them, you don't even know that they only wrote that to get you to come to that conference, right? But there's a link at the end. So we think about what are the business goals? What are we trying to accomplish? An audience has to come first. It has to be useful. It has to be relevant. When you look at all the different sites out there that have grown their audience organically, their audience comes first. They monetize it the second they can, but there's no discussion like, oh, well, we should write this because my boss likes that topic. Or, one advertiser who may or may not advertise with us wants that story. If it doesn't fit for the audience, you either have to expand your audience or you don't write it. And then we have to distribute it really well. So as a guy who grew up in print journalism, this is really hard to wrap my head around because my distribution was built in, right? I wrote the story. They sent it to 100,000 people in the morning. They read it, dumped it on the web. At that time, we didn't really care if anybody read it. But today, average content that's well distributed can beat awesome content that's not distributed well at all. Make sense? Did I say that right? So you have to have those two together. And I'll show you the structure we set up at Stamats to actually accomplish that, because they're very different skill sets, right? I might be a good storyteller, but I might not be a good syndicator, for example. So this is just, I know some people already asked for this yesterday, this is the change in, lack of a better term, reporting structure we went through. So 1990s, you had a publisher, you had sales, content, audience, production, they were all under a publisher. In the 2000s, that moved more, the production team and audience team moved off of that chart, and sales and content reported to a publisher. So one thing, as you're going through change, that you have to acknowledge is what is changing. So the other day, I told one of my editors-in-chiefs, and I said, you actually haven't had a boss in 17 years. Because he reported to a publisher for 17 years. Now, the publisher was a boss, I get it, but not an editorial boss, right? Like they didn't grow up in content. And then 2017, I was not there at Stamats, so my role was created, and they aligned it across the different brands. So they split that up a little bit more, and today we don't actually officially have the publisher role anymore at all. Are there no questions yet? No? Okay, we'll keep going. So then today, this is the model, this is the structure we use on the editorial team. That entire team reports to me. We still have editors for the different brands. We have 3 brands. One brand is for meeting planners. That's on the left there. They have technically 2 writers on that brand directly, and the editor-in-chief. We have 2 brands that are in the commercial buildings industry. So they're very, very similar. So we actually combined that team. There were no cuts on that team, but we combined that team into one team. And the reason we did that is because the content they write can be used a lot of times on both brands. It needs slightly different angles, but that's why we put that together. I joked today, we're at an event. Here's a meeting. Can I find a story for meeting planners from this event? Yes? No? I can't. I already did, right? I already filed one because everything is so compact. I did a quick video. I shipped it over. Do you think I can find a story from this hotel for building owners, facility managers? Probably, right? How about interior designers? Might not, depending on how it's looking, could be a good story or not so good story. But you certainly can. Then the next team we created is the digital team. So the editorial team, they own the writing. We keep saying writing, but really the content creation. Not everything has to be written. We do podcasts, we do videos, whatever else comes up. So all those things fall to that team. Then the digital team, they focus on how do we get it in front of people? How do we push things back to the writers when it's crap? Do you know what crap stands for? It's an acronym. Content really annoying to people. So when it's really annoying to people, we shouldn't publish it just because we have it. That team's job is to push it back and say, why would you even send this to me? Who edited this? Did Christoph edit it? Oh, he did. Ooh, was he asleep at the wheel? They need to push it back because we know what works online and we works what doesn't work. That team also handles webinars. I know it actually says events on there, but that's actually the webinars because they're very closely interlinked. And then we added a digital analyst. I was at a conference in February, and somebody said, Christoph, who should run the analyst role on the team? Any guesses? Who should run that role? Anybody know? Not a trick question. Well, maybe it is. Let me ask you this way. Who on your team should be filling the writing role? The writer, right? I mean, you don't say, oh, the admin or the person running social media. So you actually need a person who runs digital analytics, who actually looks at the numbers, what's working, what's not working. Is that even correct? Are there bots? Are there other things? Do we care about this thing? Do we care about another thing? And you need that kind of role, so we created that. And this person, I already have other people in the company now that they want to use him for client work, so certainly an indicator that that is a model that works. Oh, and then we have the design team. So all these guys grew up in the print world. They've done a very nice job learning digital design, which is different. So when you're talking about white papers and infographics. The biggest thing I still see companies do out there, they create white papers. And have you seen those? They have 2 columns or 3 columns in their white papers. Do you know what I'm talking about? Can somebody tell me, how do you read a white paper that has 3 columns on your mobile phone? How? How do you read an infographic that has text this small? Right? You don't. Whoever created those, they're not thinking about how people consume content. They're not audience first. Maybe if I'm going to push this further, congratulations, you sold a white paper, and then you wonder why nobody reads it, because they can't, because 40% of your people are coming from mobile. So that team leads those efforts to make sure this stuff is created in an interesting way. People can consume it. It's innovative. The one thing they've done is to do more GIFs. Is it GIF or GIF? What side of the wagon are you on? GIF? I'm on the GIF bandwagon. So I don't know. I'm not in charge of pronunciations. But what they do is they create things that people can actually consume, whether it's video, editing, podcasts, all those different things. They focus on that. The next thing we did, so this, if you're a marketer, this is a very, very common thing for you to do. We created personas. So when I go to a publishing company, a newspaper, and I say, who's your audience? And you know what they say, the people who have been there for 30 years or even 5 years? We know. How do you know? Oh, we know. Okay, who is it? Right? But it's not actually written down. So this is a model that every marketer that's worth their money actually has, right? They have a persona created. They give it a fancy name, like Carl Commercial in this case. And then they create content for that persona. There might be other publishing companies who do it. Ebner Publishing in Germany, they've done this for about 8 years. That's kind of where we stole that idea from when I met with their CEO. But it's really in marketing, everybody does it. Once you have this, you have to use it. So when somebody writes a story or does a podcast, and you look at it and you go, what persona is this for? And they go, Guy Wendler, our retired CEO. He's not a persona, right, that we've actually outlined in our strategy. So you use it to hold people accountable, to write content, to produce content that actually matters and that people will consume. Then we created goals. I know there's been a lot of talk about how do you generate revenue, how do you make money, how do you create new products. I'm not talking about any of that today, but this is a model, like I didn't come up with this. This is a model, actually, how you build your audience, and then how do you turn that into revenue with other things. But the bottom line is, you can't make any revenue if you don't have an audience, and if you don't keep building your audience, right? So I talked to a publisher the other day. They have like 7 million views in a month. And they said, we're trying to get to 10 million. I'm like, why? Everybody knows you. They go, well, because we got to keep going. Like, there's no stopping. There's no end game in mind. So, of course, that's interesting in B2B, because B2B, I like to say, is the original blogging, right? Very niche. Here's the topics we cover. But we created goals, and people write for them and create content for them. One was reach. One is visibility. If people can't find our content, why do we even put it on the web? What's the point? So think about that. How do we do that? This is one example for visibility. And I love this example because it's so simple. This is a news release. I'm the first person to tell you that writing of news releases stinks. It's not journalism. But this was halfway interesting, and nobody else covered it anywhere. So guess what happened when people started searching for this topic? We won, right? We got people coming over. Now, are some of those people not necessarily the persona that we're trying to go after? Sure, but what are you going to do? You can't just not show it to all those people. The most important goal is writing for conversion. So this is where you actually drive people to do something that either directly or indirectly makes you money. What's interesting about this, when I see people first, when they learn how to write for this, they use, we are industry leading, the world's premier whatever. I am the best session at this conference. I can't say that. Seriously. We are the biggest convention center on the East Coast. According to who? Your marketing team? You got to knock it off, right? Nobody talks like that. The way conversion works is you're highly educational, highly informational. You never use superlatives, right? Like, I'm the best, blah, blah, blah. You don't use that marketing gobbledygook. And then when you do it well, people actually sign up. Like that marketing AI conference, I'm going to it. I am. Not even a joke. So here's an example of how the team has done that. And I had nothing to do with this article. I did not edit it before it went out, but it showed up in my feed. If you are an executive and you're struggling with keeping up with all the content that your team creates, I use all of our publications are in Apple News. And I go to Apple News every night, and I just see what's the latest. That's how I do it. You could do an RSS feed to your email, something like that. But if you go to your homepage, the newest article might not even be on your homepage, right, depending on your strategy. So that's what I do. Anyway, so that showed up in my Apple News. And I like social media. I was like, this is really interesting. And I'm like, I'm reading it. I'm like, so interesting. Reading it. I'm like, oh, there's a webinar. Right? So the conversion is to get you to come to the webinar. So webinars make money because they have sponsors. Right? There's no cost to attend. So this is a conversion-centered article. It's actually a lot harder to produce than it sounds because, people, especially when you work with clients, because they want to use superlatives. We already talked about that. You have to keep building your audience. The other thing that we're doing more and more of is we're building our audience, but we're also extending our audience. So our digital analysts will tell us that if I have 85,000 people that I know, I can actually grow that audience tenfold just by doing remarketing, social media remarketing, other such tactics. That's, agencies would do that, maybe not as traditional to publishing. Everything we do is performance driven. So this is, I think I took this way early on when this list was created, but we have a running total for all the writers on how their content is performing. And this is we share this company-wide. And somebody asked yesterday, do they get paid more or less, depending how their content performs. It's not like a commission structure like a sales team might have. But to be perfectly honest, you have to perform to be a content creator at Stamats. And even if you're not on the top of the list, you have to show indicators to move to the top of the list. Now, sometimes people will say, well, that's very individualistic. So Janelle Penny has been #1 for a long time. So one of her goals currently is to help Tyler catch up. So if she was selfish, she would say, well, what if he catches me? I'm like, great. It's like a sack bunt, right? The winning run, sack bunt for the winning run. So we do count that as well. We go after collaboration. We go after performance. And then we go after how do you create new ways to monetize things. And, growing up as a journalist, if you would have told me I would talk about this topic today, I would have said, that's crazy. Journalists don't talk about money. That's also why they don't make any money. But we also look for new ways to monetize things. So, for example, we have a conference next week in Las Vegas. I'm the one going. I'm completely booked. So the editorial team and the digital team, they sent an email, and they said, can we send an email to everybody we know is attending and say, our editorial person is completely booked. However, if you're interested in buying a sponsored podcast, we would be happy to give you priority access. That's a new way of making, getting revenue out of that. As you can see, we all travel a lot, priority access, not sitting in the back. But everything is performance driven. And then the best writers that we have, so for example, Sarah Kluppel on this chart, she is a little further behind, but on the latest one, she's actually getting really close to #2. So she's actually declaring that I'm trying to get a couple home runs to catch #2. #2 is catching #1. So what happens is the more we drive the numbers, the more people pay attention, the more readers we have, the more likely we can actually try to sell ads and other things.
The frequency of the articles, like Janelle, does she have 3 times the articles?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So when I grew up in marketing, people would say, and they say that today even still, be more deliberate. Do less, but be more deliberate. If that's your strategy, good luck. Seriously. Like, do you tell a baseball player, be more deliberate? You say, get as many at-bats as you can and swing at the ball. So you do, the more you swing, there is actually a correlation. The more you swing, the more likely you have to be up on the top. But it doesn't mean you have high-performing articles. You still have to write high-performing ones. So what we did is we actually looked at Janelle's articles, and the headlines are things like, what's the difference between a property manager and facility manager? You know, like people actually search for that. And then the other team members, they try to copy. But there is a correlation, absolutely. We don't have a quota for people. But when people keep going down the list, we do look at their numbers. And if they only had 2 articles last month, guess what? That is probably one reason why you didn't get there. Nobody has time. How do you create more content that performs well? So on the right, you have, this is a true chart from like early last year for one of our sites. And most articles have 100 views or less. It's not very much. I mean, you know, my personal blog, I wouldn't be happy with 100 views or less, quite frankly. So create less of those articles and create more right in the middle. Maybe not the ones that have 50,000 plus views, but the ones that you know, are kind of in the middle. It is hard to do, to figure out what performs and what doesn't perform. I've done it for, you know, a couple decades, and sometimes I file a story and I wonder, I'm thinking, this is a home run. This is awesome. And nobody cares. And then sometimes I file something, I'm like, that's average. And all of a sudden it takes off, right? So it's not an exact science. It's just something to keep in mind. But the more you can create articles in the middle, the first step for editorial people, especially if they've been around the block a couple times, is to have to look at the numbers, right? Because when I grew up in journalism, we didn't even look at the numbers. There were no numbers. They were the same every day. And of course, everybody read my article in print, right? Prove me otherwise. So you want to create more content in that. Then we have to actually expand what we write about. So I know that's a hot topic in B2B because we are focused, but we do need to think about who do we reach next. So we have 2 brands, actually all 3 brands are currently thinking about who is the next audience we're trying to reach. Do we do residential? Do we do property managers? I'm like, I don't even know what the difference is between a property manager and a facility manager. Maybe that's why we should talk about it. But all those different things, we have to think about how do we expand it. So you have your core content, and then you have related content, and then somewhat related, slightly related, and now it's a stretch. So guess what happens? As you grow in your audience, the core content changes and expands, right? So if it's in somewhat related today, and you're building on that audience, on that content type, you probably won't, it's going to actually move into the core content area. But you have to do this. Every company that I've seen actually make this work, they're somehow expanding. Slightly different, not publishing. Under Armour, right? Professional athletes first used that. Other athletes, weekend warriors, regular people. And now my 4-year-old wants to wear $120 T-shirts that she'll grow out of in like 2 weeks. Right? Am I right? I mean, that's 15 years ago. Only professional athletes wore Under Armour. So, same concept. Really quickly, when you create content, what we do is we look at the return on effort. So I know we talk about ROI, but what is the effort you have to put in, you know, to then create it? So when I hear people say, you know, when we used to create trifold brochures in marketing, take us like 6 months. That return on effort, I mean, good luck trying to get something out of that, right? It took forever. I mean, think about the cost you put in there. So you want to create content in a way that's highly efficient and sets you up to win. So this is the create once, publish everywhere model. I didn't come up with it. This is what we use for most every story. Not every story gets every channel, right? We kind of pick and choose. But this is an example from Interiors and Sources. We were out at the Turf showroom here in Chicago, actually, and very visual. So we put things on social media. That's nothing to celebrate yet. My 11-year-old puts things on social media to her 5 followers, right? So not, heck yeah, good stuff, Christoph. But you got to start somewhere. If you just have your notebook and you go back and you want to write a story later that then goes in print in 4 months, that's not create once, publish everywhere. That's the old model. So we do everything from our phones. then it goes on the web. And everything has to go on the web, right? That's kind of where you build your kingdom. We did a podcast that was published. Every podcast we publish on all of our brands goes to like 9 different channels: iTunes, Spotify, Google Pocket Play, all those different channels. Automagically, it goes there. But again, I'm reaching another audience. So I'm trying to maximize my return on effort. Finally, there was a video. So we actually did shoot a VR video. We just put the camera in the middle of the room, did some audio, and then the editor put it together, and then we published that video. I mean, it took him like 2 hours. I actually did video production for a little while, and guess what? I can't remember any editor ever doing anything in 2 hours. Maybe TV news, we got things done in 2 hours. And then that article still ended up in print. So another indicator that I don't hate print. It's on my chart, right? But hit all the channels, maximize what you're trying to do. I know we're running out of time. This is just another example from Puerto Rico. We did a live video of this guy talking about the solar panels. The video went on Twitter TV, Periscope. I think those were the only channels in that case. We wrote an article, and then we used the video again to publish it as a more edited version. It had a few hundred views. And the return on effort was pretty high. Really what we're trying to do is we're trying to create as much content as we can with the least amount of effort. That doesn't mean, we still need experts who can do it, but what we really need is people who can ask good questions and who can move a conversation forward. So when I go to all these different conferences, I'm not an interior designer, but I can ask you about interior design, right? I can say, why does anybody care? I can ask you questions about these topics, and then we can turn that around into all these different content pieces. That's just another example of how Create Once, Publish Everywhere looks. If you have content, throw it a parade. It's not print or digital. It's not print versus digital. It's not social media or. It's really all of the above. So the more you can automate that process, the better. We're still kind of a little ways from that, but there are tools out there depending on what CMS you're on. You can publish once on your website, and then it pushes to your email and social media and all those other things. We're actually looking how do we export from digital directly to print. Sounds super simple in my head, but digital articles are usually much longer than print articles, like quite a bit longer, right? So there is actually a good amount of editing still involved. Try everything. And try it today. Don't throw hurdles into your staff's team. Don't tell them, oh, here's another thing you have to do. Find the people who want to try these things. I'm always tickled when we use Basecamp for our project management, and when I see things on there, like there was a note, we're doing new 404 pages, arrow pages on your website. And the one for buildings.com now has a dog on it with a construction head. And it says something like, this page needs a retrofit, please go here for other things, or something like that. So totally on brand, kind of funny. On Interiors and Sources, they're talking about monetizing the 404 page. I have no idea how that's even possible, but I like the thinking, right, at the very least. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but at least it's an idea. You got to start somewhere. I didn't even read that Friday. I was like, I don't even know how that's possible. So, yeah. So what I'd like to know is why do we have so much traffic on a 404 page? But you gotta appreciate the thinking and moving things forward. So really the bottom line comes back to be successful, you have to create content that people consume, that fits with your audience, that fits with your goals. Because without an audience, it's really, really hard to actually make a go of it. Whether it's events, whether it's print, whether it's digital. And the landscape is so competitive. I mean, everybody is just creating stuff, and that's why you have other people competing with you. That's a cool transition. I don't know why it's doing that. But good. Any questions? I know we're out of time. I hope you can create content that people care about.
So can you talk a little bit about does your editorial staff have a standard set of SEO practices it follows? Yep. And is that solely their responsibility, or is there someone on your web team who looks at that and says this article isn't optimized the way it should be?
So the writer owns their content. So they should go to the digital team and say, could I please get a set of keywords that I'm writing for. Like, what are you recommending? So we look at keyword volume, and since we're in B2B, sometimes it's pretty small, right? Like when you talk about meetings today especially, there's a lot of people searching for food and beverage and events. I'm not so sure they're all event planners, quite frankly, right? So they send it to that team, they get a set of keywords back, and then they try to make their content work with the ones that were recommended in mind. Sometimes when they don't do it, and it's not, so if you have breaking news, I'm okay if we skip it, because if you get it out quicker, sometimes that's necessary. But the digital team is supposed to push it back when they're not writing for keywords. Every once in a while we have, especially, it's not about age, but longer term employees who put their keywords, and I see and I say, oh, who ran these keywords for you? And they go, nobody did. I just picked the keywords from the article I wrote. And that's not how you do SEO research, obviously. So it's a collaborative effort. Yep. Next question.
So the earlier slide that you had where you were talking about getting as many views as possible, right, for these articles. You also mentioned earlier about having the goals and the conversion, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then the quote you said, the girl at the top had something like, "What's the difference between a building, manager and
property manager and a facility manager?"
Right. Yep. So my concern, and maybe the concern of a lot of folks who want to try to get as many views or look up or hits as possible is, are you like almost watering down your content and ending up getting the wrong people viewing? So do you guys, and this might be tying into the keyword stuff as well, right? So how do you protect and prevent that? Because as you make it more fun and more exciting to get as many hits as possible, you also may dilute, and then the sponsors get in, and then the advertisers, et cetera, et cetera. So any help on that?
It is a concern that people bring up, but it's also a numbers game, right? So for example, when we did articles in healthcare, we had an article in OB, GYN, take off globally. So that's, pregnant women. And somebody says, why do they care? Like, OB is the most local service in a hospital, right? Other than if you get shot, you're going to go to the nearest emergency room. But what actually happens is, it took off globally. Guess what? The local traffic followed, right? So do you have a big chunk of unrelated traffic? Certainly you do, but you also grow your relevant traffic. So, just by the virtue of that.
So it evens out, essentially, you're saying.
Well, you have more traffic, but you also have irrelevant traffic for that purpose. But you're growing the relevant traffic at the same time. Yep. I think they're giving me the hook. If you have any questions, I'll be over there. Table number 2. I don't know what time, sometimes today. Thanks, everyone. Good luck.